With summer coming to a close, a lot of conversations are starting to switch to the world of hunting. And we're going to be doing just that in today's episode. Our guest is Luke Dusenbury, an incredible videographer, photographer, conservationist, and hunter in the world of big game hunting. Luke has worked hunts all over the world, from the Pacific Northwest to New Zealand to the harsh tundra of Alaska. This conversation goes into the ins and outs of what it means to be a hunter, what it takes to be in the wilderness in search of big game, how to ensure your safety in a lot of different situations, and what it takes to be successful in the pursuit. This is a conversation you're not going to want to miss, and y'all, it's a good one. Welcome to the Katie C. Sawyer podcast. I'm your host, Katie, and today I'm sitting down with my friend and colleague, Luke Dusenbury. Luke, thank you so much for taking the time to sit with us today.
Katie, thanks so much for having me on. Stoked to talk with you.
Oh man, the stoke is all mine, I assure you. So you have like a crazy impressive portfolio, mostly focused around the wilderness as a videographer and photographer. And before I get into that, we actually met on-site sport fishing championship series when we were working last season at like 13 various locations throughout the Gulf of Mexico, Caribbean, and Northern Atlantic. Give us a little bit of insight on what your position was like with the SFC that season.
Yeah, I can't remember which stop it was at where we met. It was probably the Gulf, I would imagine, if I was trying to remember.
They all meshed together.
I know, it's just like a blur, especially last year. It was just so crazy. But yeah, my role kind of is just I don't know, like if it was like in baseball, I'd be like a utility player, just like fill in whatever gaps need to be filled in. Like if I need to be on a boat filming for 3 days, sleeping out there on the boats, I'm doing that. Or if they be on site or on shore doing stuff for social, doing that kind of stuff, or, you know, just doing stuff with like different partners and ambassadors, on the shores of various locations. Cause sometimes we'll have like different brands or different partnerships or sponsors with SFC at different locations. So just honestly, whatever Chad and Steve need, whatever the SFC needs, just trying to help out any way I can. So yeah.
You did a great job of it. I mean, the fact that you're able to both be a resource for quality photographs as well as getting these like crazy action shots for live television of jumping fish in the ocean at sea, like it's not a very common skill set that you have. And I like want to get into, your portfolio with hunting has been, it just is so impressive to me because these aren't just like your regular, like I'm from South Texas. A lot of our hunts are, not all of them. We have public land hunts that can be very challenging, but a lot of our hunts are, like private land, public land, feeder fed, can drive up most of the way, maybe trek a mile, that sort of thing. But what I've seen in your portfolio is something quite different and quite a bit more rugged. But before we get into that portfolio specifically, tell me about your background in photography and filmography and how you got to where you are today. Tell me where you're from, where you're located now, and what kind of ignited that passion.
Yeah, thank you so much, Katie. Yeah, it's kind of crazy, like going, what you first started saying about like the SFC, like filming and stuff. Like, yeah, it's, my background's more so in like the Western hunting, like Western outdoor, like hiking, kind of that kind of industry. So like getting my start like with doing the SFC stuff, like the offshore fishing, was just like, I literally felt like, no pun intended, but like a fish out of water. In a lot of ways, like creatively, it really kind of pushed me. And one of my favorite things about the SFC was just the team of, all the people, from people like you to all the guys with, Preach Productions, just like getting to learn from them, rub shoulders with them, and just like getting just like kind of be like iron sharpening iron, just like learning, having a crew of like 10 guys who are just all incredibly talented in all their own ways and just learning from each other. It's been like one of the biggest blessings of my career, honestly, the last
so
2.5 years. But yeah, getting my start with it, I'm from a small town in Oregon, kind of in southern Oregon near like the California border, and just grew up, hunting with my dad, being outside a lot. Like was super blessed to grow up like on 100 acres. So I was like always outside. We had like a
Wow.
28 acre little pond slash lake thing. It was like a really big pond. It was basically a rock quarry that was filled in just with the Rogue River flowing through there. So we had like just smallmouth and just like like bluegill, just like really tiny little fish. But
That's
you know,
so
because they
fun.
were in that pond, like I remember when I was 5 years old, I caught a 5 pound bass, and it was like a huge deal. So
It's a
like,
huge deal.
yeah, yeah, it was just like it was pretty cool. Just like I could wake up in the morning, ride my quad down there, and my dad would go get me worms from the gas station, and so I kind of like that was kind of my start like in the outdoors and stuff.
You were
And then
bred into it
yeah,
for
and
sure.
my it all came from like my dad, my family, but yeah, I grew up like hunting with my dad and stuff, my uncles, and but then like photography didn't come into it until actually like into college. My parents got me a GoPro, and I just started like taking little pictures with just like, you know, like the little waterproof GoPro action cameras. And that just kind of started my love for it. And just kind of like fast forwarding through college, I got just kind of like borderline obsessed, just really passionate about just like capturing memories, capturing moments, and then just seeing like how those could just bless people, you know, just through social media or just like, you know, just them seeing it and partaking in it, and you know, kind of living vicariously through that media. And it,
I don't want to, I'm sorry
no,
to
you're
interrupt,
good.
but I do
No,
want to
you're good.
know to dive into that a little bit. What were you studying in university and
Yeah,
like what time period is this?
yeah.
Like, is
So this
this
would
like
be,
early aughts?
yeah, this would be. I got a GoPro in 2015, so almost 10 years ago now.
So
Um,
Instagram was full force.
yeah, Instagram was like it was definitely like fully on, but it was still pretty early on in terms of taking photos that weren't just your iPhone. So like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, taking photos with my GoPro, for example, and then like putting them onto my phone and then posting them was like, that was still fairly new. And
Yeah.
then from there, like, you know, DSLR cameras and then taking those photos and putting them on Instagram. So it was like pretty, I wouldn't say I was like in like one of the early adopters by any means, but like it was definitely still in its infancy.
Mm-hmm.
Like the Instagram logo, I remember still looked like a camera, like, you know, like the old
Yeah.
vintage camera.
Okay. Oh, you have that
Um,
memory. I
yeah.
love that.
But but yeah, so that's kind of how I got like started in photography. And then you know, I played baseball in college, so like my time with like being outside and hunting was kind of like put on the back burner. And it was
Mm-hmm.
something I did just kind of like on the weekends, or if I had, you know, just a break in my schedule, because my schedule was just totally full of just basically school and baseball, because they're like two
Yeah.
full-time jobs at that point. But in college, I was studying history to be a history teacher. And I still got my degree, still finished that, did a year of grad school. And then I ended up just after that year of grad school, I decided to go just try and make it with like freelance. And I had no idea what that looked like, you know, or what I really wanted to do. I just was like, I really just love photography. And I've just seen the doors that God's opened with that. And, you know, in my short time in college, and I was like, I might as well just like try it. And then if it doesn't work out, or, you know, if I crash and burn or whatever, I'll just go back and, you know, be a teacher, because I, you know, had that degree and I totally could,
Yeah.
you know, whether that's a sub or a full-time teacher. And, you know, I just finished my graduate school
Yeah.
because I had
It
like
was a
about
fallback.
yeah, it was, you know, like a fallback, but like, you know, a pretty good one. Like it wasn't like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, like, oh, you know, if I, you know, I wasn't dreading that option, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
I get
So
that. For sure, that totally makes sense. My dad
yeah,
always said, like, he's like, look, get the paper and then
yeah,
do whatever the heck you want.
yeah,
He's like, you can always have the paper afterwards if you
yep.
need it. Yeah,
Yep.
I
Yeah.
totally agree.
And I'm super grateful I stuck it out and finished, because, like, you know, it's just, for
Yeah.
me, it's like, I tell people, because people are like, you were a history major? Like, you don't even use that anymore. But it's like, in a way, you kind of do, because,
You
like, at
do.
least in my opinion, like, especially in the world we live in, just like being able to think critically about what's happening all around us. And that's really what a history major teaches you to do, is just like think critically about the world around you, the world, you know, in the past, and then using that to kind of like help you make good decisions for the future. So,
100%. I love
yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
The lessons you learn in university too, they're like, it's more than just like what the curriculum is
Exactly.
saying. Like it's the
Yeah.
way you think, it's the way you respond to situations. It's all about that. But
Yeah, and there's
continue. And it's
the
not for
relationship.
everybody, but
Yeah, yeah, and the relationships I met there, just some of the best people I ever met in my life, and just lifelong friends still. So
so cool.
yeah,
So then you decided to go freelance. Didn't
yep,
know what it was, didn't know what it looked like.
yeah. I was like shooting weddings, family photos. I did some work for a church part time in Portland, Oregon, just living with some buddies up there. And then kind of like in that season of like summer of 2018 was when I went freelance and left grad school. I got connected with a company in the outdoor industry called Mountain Ops, and just like super long story short, ended up working for them for about 2 years, and just was like such a blessing. Met some of the most incredible people ever. and just really got thrust into the outdoor industry, and just like really, sharpened my skills and just learned a ton from everybody there and just all the experiences there, and built really good relationships. And then, yeah, and then in 2020, I just kind of had the desire to go freelance again. And again, this was like before COVID hit. So like this was like early 2020, and I didn't really know what that looked like again, but I was just like, I'm just kind of feeling like the itch to go and just try something new. Like I said, I just had no idea. And then went freelance right when COVID hit, basically. And it's been, kind of a wild ride ever since, and now we're looking at 4 years post that. And it's just been kind of crazy, all the unique things I've been able to do, mostly focusing in like I said, like the outdoor hunting world. But, in the last 2.5 years, getting involved with the SFC and doing more fishing stuff. I've done a little bit of fishing stuff up in Alaska, like with the addictive fishing guys.
So cool.
Which was cool. A lot of mosquitoes.
Oh no.
But yeah, it was like, yeah, we were like in full on like waders, Gore-Tex, bug nets, the whole 9 yards. But it was pretty cool. I mean, those are really great guys, and we were up there for a week, and just like it was like a whole different side. It was like mixing like Western hunting with fishing up there, in like grizzly country and everything. It was pretty rad. So
that was that before or after you filmed the Nothing But Daylight film with Go Hunt? Go Hunt?
Yeah, Go Hunt. Yeah, so that was actually the same summer. So I went up there in June with the Addicted guys, filmed the salmon trip, and then just like 2 months later in August, went up there with Go Hunt and filmed that caribou hunt with them. And
that's crazy. Okay, you guys, I gotta I gotta say something. So I'm watching this film that Luke filmed in the Alaskan tundra, obviously in the summertime, like you just said. So it's nothing but daylight because it's so far north, and the sun never really sets. And this is so mind blowing to me and it looked like, honestly, like I was both really cold watching it and like needed to go take a hot shower afterwards because it looked so wet and cold, but also like super envious because you guys get dropped off by a plane and you're in the middle of nowhere, the four of you, for 10 days is the plan, and you're just caribou hunting, and the only resource you have is the wild. And this is just so crazy to me. And so I'm going to go ahead and just like dive in a little bit to some of my questions, because when you're filming these kinds of hunts, like this is, as in my mind, and I could be wrong, but in my mind, this is about as extreme as it gets. It's a difficult terrain. It's difficult landscape. It's a difficult hunt. These guys, you had one rifle hunter and two bow hunters with you. And I mean, the bow hunters it's just crazy. It was so cool to watch this film. You guys need to check it out if this interests you at all. But it's one thing. In my mind, it's one thing to go on these hunts and to be trekking miles and miles in rough terrain and packing out and doing everything you need to do. But it's something completely different to be going on these hunts, doing all of those things while simultaneously capturing quality content on it and carrying all your gear with you and backing up all your content. Like, how do you do that? Like, get into a little bit more of the like technical side of what something like that looks like.
Yeah. So like on that one, we like flew in, and basically like, absolutely zero service, like completely middle of nowhere. Like all we had were our Garmin inReaches to talk to
quality
loved ones back home.
I'm still alive.
And also
I
the
haven't
pilot.
been eaten by a bear.
Yeah, and we saw grizzly bears. Yeah, and we saw wolf tracks. We never saw wolves, but they're definitely up there. But yeah, we flew in.
They saw you.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah. We flew in, landed on top of this like little mountain thing. And it was one of the most surreal experiences because I didn't really have any idea of like what to expect. Like I thought maybe we'd be like close to like some woods or lakes or something like that, because we brought like some fishing poles and stuff. But yeah, we landed like basically on top of this like little mountain thing, and there's like zero trees. Like as far as you can see, it is just like grassland, but not like grassland like you think of like the Midwest or something like that. Like it's just like tundra grassland, which if you haven't experienced it, it's basically like furry basketballs that are just like everywhere. And then in between the basketballs, there's a 2-foot hole with water in it. And so the first day you're just learning.
So terrible.
Oh, it's horrible. The first day literally just trying to not roll your ankle, but you do.
Yes.
Like it's
But you do
impossible.
constantly.
And so it takes
And
you
your
like,
socks are wet
oh,
constantly.
your
Oh,
boots are my I literally had to throw my boots away after that that because because it was like we were kind of there in like late August, which sounds like, oh, it's like nice, but it was like the high was like 50, on the hot
oh,
days, and then it would get down to like freezing, and then last day it snowed, so it
yeah.
was like every night it would freeze, but then it would
Oh
never be
gosh.
dark, so you'd have to like sleep with the beanie over your eyes just to like, because I'm like really sensitive to light when I sleep, like
Yeah.
I have to
Hmm.
have a pretty dark room, so I had to have like a beanie over my eyes just because it was never really dark.
Right.
Even like at 11 o'clock at night, we'd be like hanging out, or like, it'd just be,
Getting back from a trek.
yeah, you'd hunt like all day and like sleep for like, yeah, it was just such your whole circadian rhythm was thrown off and everything. It was like a different world, seriously. I know it's kind of a cliche,
No,
but yeah,
but
like
seriously,
the first
unlike
day,
anything I've ever even seen on television,
yeah,
like watching this film, I was like, whoa,
yeah,
like this
yeah,
is crazy. And honestly, the only thing I can think of about like the temperature is like at least the meat was good to go. Like you didn't have to worry
yeah.
about the meat going bad or anything because it was cold enough. But the rest, I mean, it looked like you guys never quite dried. I
Oh
don't know. I could
no,
be wrong.
yeah.
Oh yeah.
Well, yeah, because you can't like really build a fire. There's nothing to build a fire with, and so all we did was like we would just get in our little tent, which was like a big dome tent that maybe seats like, I think it sleeps like 8 or 10 people, and we had like plenty of room with the four of us, but we like just kind of rigged these like little guy lines and just like hung our clothes to like kind of dry, but like kind
Okay.
of didn't really. And so like every morning you're putting on like literally frozen socks, like
I
because
bet
they're,
it smelled so bad.
oh, it was. I mean, yeah, that's how those kind of hunts go. Yeah, it was one of those things. Like after it was all said and done, I was like, I think I need like a year or two off of like that type of Alaska, because Alaska is just, it's just brutal. Like it's just,
Is
everything's wet, everything wants to kill you. The mosquitoes are
Mhm.
like birds, like they're just huge. It was like, I don't know. It was one of those things. Like after, like I was like, I need a year of like kind of like, whew, because like I did that
Yeah.
fishing trip before and just got like eaten
Hmm.
alive by mosquitoes and everything. But now I got the itch to go back. So maybe next year
The
I'll go
mosquito
back
bite
up
went
there.
away and you're still itching.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, in terms of like the gear side of it, kind of like you were saying, like, yeah, it's definitely like a challenge on like any sort of like Western hunt, like let alone a hunt like that when you have like just so much moisture in the tent. Like condensation is such a prevalent issue, with like lenses and camera bodies, and then charging them. And then that hunt was like pretty cloudy a lot of the time. So just having like a really solid solar charger is like just so important.
Essential.
And then on that one, I was able to bring like a couple extra like power banks that are like pretty decent size. So I never had like a battery issue per se. And I was
That's
only
crazy.
bringing, I probably had like 6 or 7 like Canon camera batteries, which each one would last, roughly probably like a half day, of like decent use, like half to a full day, depending on how much I shot. And I tried to be a little conservative, especially like early on. And
Hmm.
luckily we did kill pretty early on. I think it was like day 4 or 5 is when we were like all done, because we knew we had weather kind of coming towards the end of the hunt.
Ooh.
So like that's the other thing with Alaska, like you can only fly out on like a good weather day. And so like if the weather's bad or there's no visibility, like the pilots can't like land to, they can't see the mountain to land on.
Yeah, it is what
So
it is.
so you're always like texting them for like updates of like, yeah, like what's the weather window look like, and kind of a thing. And like I said, we just got super blessed. Like we were able to get my caribou and Josh's caribou on basically day 2 of the hunt. And then we had, I think it was 2 days of just kind of chilling because the weather was so bad. Like you couldn't even see like 100 feet out of the tent with the fog.
Well,
So
hold up, because y'all both got a caribou that day, and
mhm,
then you had to the four of you had to trek 2 caribou
yeah,
back to the camp. Like,
yeah,
and it was on the furry basketballs,
yeah,
surrounded by
yeah,
water.
yeah. You're only moving about a mile an hour on that
Oh
on
my
that
gosh. And
terrain.
how far away from camp were you when you
We're
shot?
we were only like, I mean, it doesn't sound that bad. We were like 4 or 4.5 miles from camp,
No, come on.
but it was. I mean, we didn't get back till almost midnight. I want to say it was. I think there's a timestamp in the film, like when we got back exactly.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
we basically learned on that one, like using the river to navigate was so much faster because then you're just walking on river rock, which like it can be a little slippery, here and there or whatever. But it's just, at least it's that hard surface and it's not like
Yeah.
as wet. But we still like, because of how the rivers are up there, there's like a braid of just different little creeks and branches. So like, no matter which path you try and take, you're always gonna have to cross the creek. And then it always seemed that like every creek crossing we had to do was like just barely deeper than our boots, because
Oh.
our boots are like Gore-Tex, so they're waterproof. And so
Yeah.
you step through them, and then like literally like just like an inch would go,
Mm,
and then so like every single day was just wet boots. But you're all in
that's
it
so
together. So
miserable.
like as long as you're all in it together, it's not as miserable. Whereas like on some hunts, one guy might soak his boots, and then he's like, just kind of has a bad attitude or complaining about it or whatever.
Yeah.
Or you might
And
be that
everybody
guy.
else isn't.
Yeah. So, but when you're all in it
Misery
together
loves
like that,
company.
yeah. And that's what like hunts like that are great for, is just like everyone's in it together.
You
So,
create some crazy bonds, I bet.
oh yeah. Yeah, that's one of my favorite parts about it, is just the relationships and just the type 2 kind of fun, the memories made.
Man, that's wild. And you
Yeah.
managed to, I mean, honestly, the fact that you managed to have enough power to sustain that trip, your camera for that trip, just blows my mind. What about backing it up? Like, are you putting your footage on a hard drive at some point? Like,
Yeah, so on that one, I did bring my laptop in there because we like flew in there, so we had a little extra room for gear and
yeah.
stuff like that. So I did have my laptop, but I want to say on that one, I actually didn't back anything up, because I can record to 2 cards on my camera
Oh,
at the same
nice.
time, and I have like pretty decent sized cards. I have like 4 or 5 12 gig cards, and then a couple other like pretty decent sized ones. And I usually won't go over that. I think on that one I maybe filmed like a terabyte ish, if I
Oh,
remember right.
wow. Okay. That's
And that's like
impressive.
photo and video, because I was doing like
Mm-hmm.
photos of the hunt as well. But yeah, I want to say I never really had a power issue, like, because what I would do is I just had these power banks, and then I would set up the solar and just kind of like stick it outside the tent, and it's like a waterproof solar panel. And then I would just
Nice.
kind of run the wire through the zipper to the power banks inside, and then we'd go out hunting all day. And then even though it'd be kind of cloudy or whatever, there's always still sunlight coming
Mm-hmm.
through the clouds, and so it'll just like kind of slowly charge it, as opposed to like getting a full charge on like a full sunny day. So you're at
That's
least getting
huge.
like, you're basically just like kind of trickle charging, and just like getting, and then I just take like that 30-40% whatever I got that full day, and just like ingest it right back into my camera batteries with a USB-C cable at night. Just like always trying to get like a little bit of it's almost like one of those like slow like trickle filters, like on the side of a mountain. You just like put your bottle under there for like a day and just like let it go. I don't know.
Just let it go.
Yeah.
Let
And
it
that's,
fill.
yeah. So to be honest, on that one, I never really had any issues. And that's just like been my strategy, is just like using like a USB-C power bank from like Anchor or something like that. And then like the one I have is an Anchor solar panel. It's only like 21 ounces. It's like
Nice.
20, maybe 28 ounces. It's super light, but it still gets like about 20 watts of power. So you're still getting like it's like one of the lightest, but also the most power, hungry devices for a solar panel that I've found on the market. So that's like my kind of go-to. And then I have like a Goal Zero one as a backup as well. But yeah, if you can just keep that, charge your Garmin, charge your phone, charge your camera batteries, like I've never had an issue with all that. So
That's huge. That's super helpful.
yeah.
I'm gonna put some links in the description, you guys, and I'll get some good links from Luke. So check it out. If there's anything we talk about in here that you want to look more into, just definitely check out the description below. But question, Luke, when you're on a hunt like that, what do you do for water? What do you do for drinking water?
Yeah, so the Alaska hunt, like nothing but daylight, that one was kind of a challenge because there was water everywhere, but you don't really want to like try and filter, even though you had water like in those like, marshy kind of grassland tundra areas, like I didn't really want to filter any of it. None of us really did, just because it's very stagnant. So we
Mhm.
would just kind of walk down to the river, which is like probably like an 800-foot drop, and then just hike it back up. Just with a
It
bunch
was
of different,
steep.
yeah, just with a bunch of different, like basically like just these bladders. Like there's a bunch of different companies, like HydroPack makes some, MSR makes some, Camelback makes some, but just like, those like 3 to 6 liter bladders, and just hiking those back up to the top, and then filtering those with like just like a squeeze bottle or like a steri pin, because the water was pretty clear. And usually if the
Yeah.
water is like clear and there's not like too many floaties, I'll just steri pin it, which is like basically, it sounds really weird, but like a UV light that you just like
Yeah.
stick in your Nalgene or your 1 liter water bottle, and you just like swirl it around like a glow stick.
For
And
sure.
it basically, it doesn't kill the bacteria, but it just sterilizes it from reproducing. So you're still like ingesting, whatever's in the water, It sounds like I said, it sounds weird, but you're still ingesting it, but it just can't reproduce and like make you sick. And I've been
Right,
using it.
which is great.
Yeah, I've been using that for
That's
like
what we want.
5 or 6 years, and I've never been sick from using it. But like I said, if it's like any sort of murky water or like a little bit cloudy, I'll use like an actual like pump or a squeeze filter, something like that.
Okay. That's cool. That's good to know. So do you always pack both of those with you?
Yeah, I always try and have at least two forms of water purification just in case like my stereo pin dies or my filter gets clogged or breaks or freezes or you just don't want to be out
Something.
there. Yeah, you want to have like two different contingencies.
Multiple options.
Yeah.
Definitely. That's cool.
Because yeah, one is none, two is one. I don't know if you've ever heard that saying,
No,
but
but I
yeah,
like it and I
yeah,
feel it. I
yeah,
could see how that would work.
yeah,
Anytime we go like for the boat, for example, if we were going to go when we went to the Canary Islands, for example, we made sure to have backups of everything on the
yeah,
boat just because if the impeller goes out, you don't want to have to rely on whatever the heck you can find on the island of Lanzarote, you know.
exactly.
So,
No, yeah, exactly.
um
Like offshore fishing is a lot of the same stuff in terms of like backcountry hunting in that respect. Just like always having like, I like for headlamps, I always have two headlamps because if one goes down, then you're like blind in the dark,
yeah.
or just using your iPhone light and you can see like 5 feet in front of you, and that's the worst.
And then you're that guy.
Yeah,
Then you're that camera guy.
yeah, or like two iPhone cords, or like just trying to have like as many duplicates as like that are like possible. Like, obviously, you can't have two of everything, but just whatever like the absolute necessities are. Just trying to have like a contingency plan for those things.
That's great advice. That is super good advice. So, as you know, I'm going to go on a public lands elk hunt in Idaho this September. I'm really excited about it, but I've never done anything like that before. So, that's all just super helpful. I do want to ask before we start, because I want to pick your brain about elk hunting Idaho, but when you're on these hunts, like the one we were just talking about, for example, and you have like these people are hunting and you're trying to collect content, it's got to be really challenging to be, still and quiet while collecting this content. Like I feel like as a hunter, you've got your focus, and your focus is that animal. And if you can pull off not being detected by that animal, it's very impressive. You have a higher likeliness of succeeding. Great. But when you're the camera guy, your focus is that animal and the hunter, and you've got multiple focuses, and it's got to be like even like significantly more challenging to be not detected by the wildlife.
Yeah, because like just like with anything, the more people you have out there, the more scent you're gonna have. Leaving around with just even your boots walking through the grass is leaving scent. And that's really the biggest ticket thing for that elk have is their nose. Like there's sometimes they can see you, or they'll see you, but maybe they don't know what you are, or anything like that. Like, but if they smell you, they know exactly what you are, and they're gone. Like that's like the biggest telltale. Like if you can just keep your wind and always just be moving with trying to get the wind in your advantage, which is hard in the mountains because a lot of times they'll be switching, but just knowing like, the last few days, the prevailing wind has been like a southwest wind, and then, just using the thermals to your advantage of like, in the morning, the thermals are, what are they doing? And then in the evening, what are they doing? And then, in this particular drainage, and just learning.
What do you mean by thermals?
So, yeah. So basically like, for example, like where you'll be at, the kind of the terrain you'll be in is like kind of like this, more like a little bit open. Like you're not going to be in like this, like the dense wooded timber. You're kind of going to kind of be in like a deserty high desert with some patches of timber that the elk will like to be in for, that'll hold water and things like that for them, and bedding areas. But like in the mornings, the air is, or the thermals are going to be coming down. So you're going to want to be basically, and all at night as well. So that's where you're going to want to be camping at, is just down there, because that wind is going to be sucking down. And then as the sun comes up during like 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock in the day, and that sun starts to hit some of those faces and different slopes and stuff, the hot air will actually rise and then bring the thermals back up the mountain, so your wind will be going up. So that's so basically you want to kind of try and hunt when that wind is consistently coming one direction, either down or up. because
And use it to your
as
advantage.
yeah, and use it as your advantage. But the thing is, the elk are also using it to their advantage. So a lot of times they'll be moving uphill when the wind's coming down to them, so they can see, or smell basically whatever's in front of them, and then vice versa. So like they're always like navigating and always just thinking about what is the wind doing. Because like if you look at like the anatomy of like an elk skull, like hopefully you get one on this hunt and you can see just how their whole skull and nose is shaped and everything. Like you're like, it makes a lot of sense because their nose is just this huge long tube, and it makes sense that they are just so good at smelling things. And for whatever reason, we just smell terrible to them, and they're very scared of us. So they just take off
I get
running.
that.
Yeah. So, but yeah, at the same time, like you'll be walking through the woods sometime and you'll smell, and you'll learn what it smells like, but you'll smell elk, kind of like a musty kind of
Wow.
smell. And you'll be like, oh, like there's, elk have been here recently, or there's like, you can smell their pee on the ground, or their poop, or that kind of thing. But yeah, it's such a cool experience. I'm really excited for you to kind of get your feet wet with elk hunting. It's definitely like not easy. It's not an easy thing, but
No.
to me, it's so rewarding and fun. And it's just that challenge that we oftentimes like, just in our modern lives are kind of like, in a lot of ways missing or yearning for, is just like trying to do like something that we as humans have done for thousands of years. And it's just very like, in some ways primal, but also just
Yeah.
like, it just feels like this is like what we are supposed to be doing. And it's just so rewarding. Even if you don't come home with something, to me, it's still
Yeah.
just so rewarding.
That's cool. Yeah, I'm so glad you said that because that's exactly, these situations, every time I go hunting, which I've only recently gotten into hunting in like recent years, but I'm almost always just like, wow, this is miserable. I am
Yeah.
not having fun, but also I am having the best time of my life and I am
Yeah.
connecting to myself in a way that I don't in any other situation.
Yeah.
Like you said, there's something primal that makes you feel like you belong and like you're doing what you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
And I think that there's something to be said about putting yourself into that discomfort and connecting to what humans have been doing for thousands of years and also what those animals have been doing for thousands of years. Like you said, the elk don't like the smell of humans. There's a reason for that.
Yeah.
Like this relationship is not new. And people have been sustaining themselves on these animals for a long time. And we're actually kind of getting further and further from that, which is a conversation for another time. But I do love that you said that. And going into this elk hunt in September, like it would be amazing if I get an elk. Like, holy cow, that would be amazing. But also I'm not expecting to, I
Yeah.
am going to prepare for it. But just to be able to experience that wilderness up there, we're probably going to be, trekking in. We might be trekking with horses, packing in for days at a time. Can you give me a little insight of like, what a hunt like that looks like? How do you prepare for something like that physically and, equipment wise?
Yeah. Physically, I mean, like where you're going, just because you told me it's some high elevation stuff. So like coming from like sea level, you're going to be up at like 8, 9, 10,000 feet. And it's
Oh
like,
no.
that is significant. It doesn't really matter like how in shape you are and stuff. Like it's just a different level when you have, just because I've been out there with guys who are really in shape, and it doesn't really matter because when you're out there hiking a mountain with a heavy backpack, it's just you're using such different muscles, and you have, like you said, like that mental aspect of it. Like you could do like a 10-mile day or a 12-mile day and literally not see anything, and then that starts like really wearing on your brain. And if your mind isn't sharp, if your mind isn't like, you don't have that like mental toughness muscle that also comes from just more time spent in the woods, like it's just going to be that much harder on you. And I've just seen guys who have all the in shapeness that you could ever ask for, but they just kind of break after like day 2 or 3 of like, oh, we didn't get an elk, on opening day or whatever. It's like, yeah, we got to keep going. We got 7 more days,
It's not
maybe
how
we
it
can, maybe,
works.
maybe we could like rest a day or something.
Mhm.
But yeah, unfortunately, it's just kind of how it goes because you're out there and it's not like you don't have like control of everything. The only thing you can really control is just like your effort and your attitude, and you just have to focus on that and just ways that how can I best implement doing that, and then just surrendering to the realities that you're in. Like hey, the elk are they're down below me in this canyon, but the wind is going straight down to them. Like I can't change that. So what do I have to do? And so you're constantly problem solving. And like, that's also one of my favorite parts about it is just like your brain is just always going and you're always just like, studying maps and like looking at like, oh, there could be water here. It could be a spring here, and that's a whole different, topic too, of just like trying to hunt where you can actually physically hunt these animals. Cause a lot of times they can get enough moisture just from the ground or the dew in the morning. And maybe there's not a spring for a mile or two from where they're at. And so like, just trying to be like, okay, I need to pack, 3 liters of water today or be prepared to spend the night maybe on the mountain with them or something like that. But yeah, I mean, there's so many little intricacies, but you're always just like, just trying to problem solve and just try and get creative. And the more you spend on the mountain, like the more time you spend out there, the more you're going to have that wisdom to draw upon for future, encounters or problems you need to solve. So
I love that. That was a great answer. That was so
yeah.
good. There's, you talk about packing your pack, it's going to be 3 liters of water today. What else do you have in your pack when you're going hunting, day hunting? Say you're not going to camp overnight, you're going to get back to camp. But what are like your tried and true provisions as a hunter when you pack for a day like that?
Yeah, like as a hunter, like for archery hunt, like in an area like you would be in, just like in the wilderness, coming back to like a base camp or a spike camp, you just have to have like your necessities like water, and then food, depending on what type of, country you're in. Say you only have like 2 liters of water, 3 liters of water, and you need like a liter for your backpacking meal. Maybe it's like, hey, I'm just going to try and get by today with just bars and, maybe like a little sandwich that you packed or something like that. And then save that one like half liter or liter of water for your backpacking meal for dinner. And then just try and like, just kind of get by throughout the day and just like kind of eat minimal stuff, just like trail mix and bars and stuff like that. Or in jerky and meat sticks or whatever. And yeah, and then you need to obviously have your game bags and your kill kit. So that's going to have like your tags, your knives, your knife sharpener, your game bags. And I like to use like a lot of companies make them now like the synthetic game bags just because they're not like the old school like kind of cotton ones. Like you just like use it one time and then you throw them away. Like these ones are reusable, which is awesome. And
That is awesome.
you can just wash them in the wash machine. They're lighter. They're more of like a tight knit, so bugs are going to have a harder time getting in there, like in flies and laying maggots and stuff like that, which is great. Then yeah, they're just tougher. Like, if you need to hang your meat in a tree, they're not going to get ripped as easily from like a tree branch or something like that. Because yeah, like a lot of times, like if you can just, get an elk down and then get those quarters, hung up at least through the night. For one, it's going to help your meat taste better. Just having that, like, that wind, kind of like aging your meat a little bit. And just that cool air and just keep it in the shade. Cause most of the time when you're hunting in September, October, like it's going to be getting down to like 40s, 30s at night.
Yeah.
So
Thank
even
goodness.
if you had
It's
to
not
leave
the
them
case
for,
here in Texas.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, you'll be at elevation, so it'll be cooler and stuff. Yeah, we do that all the time. Like we'll get something down and hang the meat and go back and come back and get it the next day. That's the biggest thing. And yeah, so they having your kill kit just with everything you need. And then yeah, maybe a little phone charger, a power bank if you need it. Because yeah, if you're using like something like Onyx or Go Hunt Maps or just mapping software in any kind, just out there, just trying to navigate and stuff, just like with offshore fishing, like just having those maps downloaded and knowing the contours, knowing the land, and where you're at. In the midst
Yeah.
of all that, whether you need to know, hey, I'm hunting somewhere near private, I need to know what the private boundary is, or I need to know where these springs are because I really think the elk could be, in this general vicinity, hitting that, at least once a day, maybe midday if it's hot. And that's a good plan too. And we can obviously talk way more about this,
Yeah.
as you get closer to your hunt, I can kind of like maybe send you a gear list or something.
That's so cool.
As
Thank you,
well
Luke.
as well as just kind of talking to you about like strategy and stuff. Like if you're going to go like early September and it's going to be a little hotter, or you're going to go later September, it'll be a little bit cooler. Just like different strategies you can kind of implement from all sorts of stuff like that. But yeah, that's like I would say that's kind of like the main things you need to have in your kit, just like food, kill kit, water. Like a lot of times you can kind of get away with hiking around with like maybe like a 15-pound pack, just with that kind of stuff.
Nice.
So
Yeah.
which is a lot
Because
better.
yeah, a lot better than
like 40, 50, 60, 70,
Yeah,
like when you're hiking in,
for sure.
with all your stuff for 7 to 10 days. But another thing I would say, and I can send you a link to some too, but be like a good set of trekking poles.
Oh,
Because
nice.
when I first got, like, I grew up hunting and we never like really used trekking poles or anything like that. And then as I got more into like the filming of like the Western hunting and like we were just like going further and further in there, and not just like really truck hunting, but like we were like spending 5, 7, 10 days in there, and just having a heavier pack in more steep, rugged terrain is just having those trekking poles because they can save like anywhere I've heard from like 10 to 40% of of how your weight gets displaced, from your pack and everything is just going
Mm-hmm.
through those trekking poles, especially like going downhill or helping you a
Yeah.
little bit on the uphill. Like just it helps save your knees, your joints, everything like that. And it, we kind of joke like as hunters, like it gives you like 4-wheel drive because you have like you have like these sticks to help you balance, or like if you have to step
Yeah.
over a log or something like
Or
that. You
the rocks are falling and
Yeah, it's just like anything like that. Like that's been one of the biggest like game changers for me is just like, it saves my knees, saves my joints, and you can still be moving at the same speed you were, and just being a little bit more safe because some of that terrain is just so steep and nasty, and the elk make it look like it's nothing.
yeah, but it's so dangerous. It can be so dangerous. And like you said, like protecting your joints, like that's so important. And going
Yeah,
in with a 10, 15 pound pack, that sounds great. But if you mentioned like, what if the elk are at the bottom of the ravine? What if you get one? Then you're coming up with an elk.
yeah,
So, your kill kit. Let's talk about that. And let's talk about how, like, goodness gracious. The idea of hiking out of something like that with an elk is just mind blowing to me. So, the biggest animal I've ever, harvested was whitetail and in South Texas. So they're not very big here, and definitely not as big as they get over in, up there. But so can you expand on the kill kit, like the process? You mentioned quartering and how, like, do you have to, like those synthetic bags, do they keep the blood, the blood away from all the rest of your stuff? Or do you have like another bag that they go in? Like, how do you
yeah,
keep things organized?
yeah.
And,
That's a great question. Yeah. So I forgot in my kill kit, I'll usually have just like a rolled up contractor bag as well, because those kill or the synthetic game bag, it'll leak a little bit of blood out, not a ton, because
yeah,
they're not fully waterproof. They're designed to breathe and let that air, kind of
which is what
pass
you want
through.
for that
Yeah,
meat for
yeah.
sure, for sure.
You want the air passing through to keep it cool. But yeah, I'll keep a garbage bag if I need to. Typically I'll use it, to put my meat on while I'm, getting it in the synthetic game bags and stuff, because I don't really care too much if my bag or my backpack gets bloody. And the style of backpack I use is from Stone Glacier, but it's a very similar style to like Mystery Ranch or Kufaru or any of these other backpack makers, where you have like a frame and then you have like a bag that goes on it. And then basically what you can do is you can like loosen the bag with just like, these straps. And then in between the frame and the bag, with all your gear and stuff, you can put that synthetic game bag with that elk quarter,
Nice.
and then just tighten it back. So basically, it kind of just compresses it to your frame and just helps you carry, that 110 pound, quarter plus, or the quarter plus your gear is probably going to be anywhere from 90 to 110 pounds, like, on average. I think if it's like a rear elk quarter,
Yeah.
which is probably like, I think a rear elk quarter is like anywhere from 65 to 70 pounds, 75 pounds, somewhere in there, depending on, if you cut the bone off at the joint, at the knee.
Hmm.
But yeah, so just having that, is just such a crucial thing, because then you don't have to, because back in the old days, like you'd get one and then you'd have to go back and get your pack frame, which was like just the frame for packing meat, and then go back in there and then pack it out. And so now having basically both in one, that's been a huge
Huge
thing
game
too.
changer.
Yeah.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
Just
That's
the gear that's come out in the last like 15 years for hunting is just like been unbelievable. Just like they're always innovating and coming out with new stuff, and it's just like completely changing the game. It's awesome.
that's amazing. So as cameraman, are you often, well, okay, so talking about the one of your films, I think it was Riverbend or Around the Riverbend.
Yeah. Rivers Bend.
Um so that this was a rifle hunting film for elk, and I have to say that the Michael Phelps joke made me laugh quite hard. Like
Yeah.
so nerdy.
Yeah.
But watching those elk swim in the river was just too cool. Like that was just too cool. But
Yeah.
also you guys having to hike that animal up out of that steep. That was so steep there.
Yeah.
And there's a part in the film where the guy's like, I've made a mistake. Like, I
Yeah.
don't know why I did this. This is
Yeah.
not what I want with my life.
Well, yeah, that's where your brain's going during that, like,
Yeah,
just that adversity time. But it's like with most things, it's just temporary. Like you just got to get through it. And that's why like
it's a
hunting is
challenge.
yeah, it's just a good like microcosm for life. It's just like, well, I have no choice but to like take another step up and then take another step, and that's like that's the only way I can get out of here. It's the only thing I can
It
do.
is
So like,
literally your only choice. Or,
yeah,
you can leave your pack behind and
yeah,
keep stepping, but then
yeah,
like no one's going to do that because they
no,
worked so hard
yeah,
for what's on their
yeah.
back.
It's just what you have to do.
And
And
it's
yeah, in
it's
our
so
modern
hard.
lives, it's like there's a lot of things that we like can avoid, or like, oh, I'm like driving my truck, I'm like, oh, I'm like a little cold, I'll turn the heat up and I just flick of a switch. Like there's so
Yeah,
much like in our lives now that we just have like full control over, and that's why hunting's so awesome, because you don't have control of pretty much anything. Like you
anything.
can control maybe like 10%, on the grand scheme of everything. Just like how hard you work, and all the things you can control, but that isn't, you could do all that perfectly, like 10 out of 10, and still come up unsuccessful in terms of getting an animal. It's just how it works.
Man, the only thing you control is your reaction to the wilderness.
Yeah.
That's just like, that's mind blowing. I'm so amped. I'm so amped to get out into the wild and to just be exposed to that. It's gonna be so cool.
Are you guys
But
driving out when you come out?
to Idaho,
Yeah.
yes, I think I'm going to drive. I'm not sure Drake's gonna be. We're not sure what the boat's going to be doing, what the season's going to be doing. I'm hoping he can be up there with me for at least some of the month, because I'm planning on going up there and like giving myself to this project. Like I really want to experience this hunt. I want to learn everything I can about hunting elk and being public lands Idaho. And I'm hoping he's going to be out, but I don't know if he's going to be making the drive up with me. It might just be me.
Gotcha.
So yes, but yeah, I'm driving so that I can bring everything back. Well, first off, so I can pack all the gear I want to pack, and
Yeah.
then bring the animal back afterwards.
No, that makes perfect sense. I would encourage you to drive as well, just in case, like I said, you can bring more stuff. You can sleep in your truck at the trailhead if you need to. Like it's just more flexible. You can bring more stuff, and then when you get something, hopefully you can just get your coolers full of ice and be on your way home.
Yeah, exactly. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what about like safety in these situations? Like we mentioned about, the Garmin InReach being really important. You can check in with the pilot if you're being flown in and out of a place, or your loved ones at home, or I'm sure if there's an emergency of sorts. What other safety precautions do you take?
Yeah. I don't know. I try not to like do anything too stupid out there. Like I try and like, go like if I'm, saying like when we're trying to get somewhere, I'm not like going as fast as I possibly can to like get to the elk or something like that. I try and like maybe go like 90% speed, just like be methodical, watch where you're stepping. You just never know. You like that rock could give way, or, you could roll an ankle and then you're 4 miles and you're, have a really bad sprained ankle and can't walk. Like it's worth it to me to go 10% slower and it'd be more methodical when you're out there. And just, I've only had really one time I've actually ever really gotten hurt out there, and I sprained my knee one time when I was in New Zealand. But like, it's just taking that extra like 10% back, I feel like is just so worth it. And it just helps you, be more mentally just like thoughtful and thorough, I feel like, and just making the best decisions that you can. And just and also just enjoying it. Like I also just love to enjoy every moment I have out there, and not just like rush, go, like white knuckle, everything. And, if I don't do this as fast as possible or whatever. And obviously there's times where you need to, hurry and do stuff like
Yeah.
that. But, there's also like, I feel like a lot of times when you just can go like 90% speed, like be quick, but not in a hurry, is what I
Yeah.
would say.
And I think that like especially in today's day and age, it's all about how quick I can get this done or how quick I can
Hmm.
do this, and rushing and not enjoying the actual pursuit
Yeah.
of your goal. What about, like if like you have like a nasty cut, or what do y'all like, what's your safety protocol um, for any emergencies like that?
Yeah, yeah. So like typically at least one person in like the hunting party I'm with, at least one person will have just like a ultralight, like kind of like med kit. And there's a bunch of different companies that like kind of sell them, but it has like, things that you can like stitch up a wound, or, antibiotic cream, or just like some basic painkillers. Like maybe a little tourniquet.
Tourniquet.
Yeah, something like that.
Hmm.
Just like, there's a lot of companies out there that sell those, and they weigh less than a pound, and they just have everything you need. Just like
Yeah.
in a little go bag. So I was trying to have one of those, like if I'm, out there a ways, and we'll be far from a truck for sure, and have no service, I'll definitely bring one of those. I mean, I've never had to use one, but at the same time, I'm glad that, I would, yeah, knock on
Knock
wood,
on wood.
I'm
Yeah.
glad I always bring it just in case.
Yeah. Of
Um,
course.
yeah. So
Yeah. On the boat, we always have a ditch bag. We knock on wood. I'm not even going to say the sentence, but y'all can fill in the blanks. But it's always good to have that ditch bag with
yeah,
everything you need in it in case you go down and you're
yeah.
somewhere crazy in a crazy current. But yeah, no, definitely. I worked with a brand called My Medic, and they do
Hmm.
a great job. They've got great kits. So I'm glad that you said that. Do you like? What about like are there any like wilderness trainings that you recommend in terms of prepping for worst case scenarios or anything like that? In Idaho specifically, I will say I had to do so many online courses just to get access to buying a license in the
Yeah.
state, which was really cool. I mean, I was just like, hours and hours of online courses just to have that. And I think that that's really cool that the state obviously puts such an importance on the safety of the hunters as well as the wildlife, because
Hmm.
it goes really into, like where to shoot and how, and how to identify, and all of these things that are so important to know, and kind of common sense, but definitely not if you don't ever get exposed to that knowledge. So
Yeah.
what is there any other, do you have any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'd say I kind of feel like I take a lot of that for granted because I've just been doing it for so long. But yeah, there's a lot of really cool like courses and things that like people can sign up for or go to, especially like this time of year in the summer. Like, guys like Ryan Lampers are putting on like a Western hunting summit. I know a gal on
That's cool.
Instagram named Her Outdoor Journey. She's doing like a women's like archery specific kind of like elk hunting course in Oregon that, just to kind of help people like, learn and be put in situations where they might not have been put in before, or just think differently about something. But yeah, there's a lot of people doing courses like that now, that I think are hugely beneficial, especially if you are wanting to get more into it, but just haven't had as many experiences as you would, want or feel comfortable with. Some people are like, I'm just going to go and figure it out, and that's great, that's fine. That's just like how some people are, like that. Like
Yeah.
like I said, I've been super blessed and fortunate. Like I've gotten to go hunting a lot as a camera guy, with some of like the best hunters of our generation, and just learn so much and just be a sponge from those guys and absorb just like so much knowledge, and make mistakes even with those guys and learn from those mistakes, and just take those, those things learned from those mistakes on to future hunt and stuff like that.
Man, I love that you said that. I just recorded a podcast with a friend of mine, Paulo, who's an Azorian spear fisherman, and he was saying the exact same thing. He's like, it's just you make mistakes and you have to learn from them.
Yeah,
And that's exactly like it's all about the experience and becoming the journey of becoming a better outdoorsman, a better hunter, a better spear fisher, a better fisher, whatever it is you're doing, whatever you're pursuing, it's about the journey of the pursuit. And I think that that's really cool. Um,
yeah, and
what are
I know like this year I'm gonna make a lot of mistakes too. Like I just know it's just gonna be part of like this hunting season, and just learning
always?
from those, and yeah, just always being like a student of the game.
Yes, a student of the game. I like it. So what are some of your like favorite, you mentioned the people that you've been hunting with, and it's very, very impressive hunters out there. and on these crazy hunts that I keep just saying how crazy they are, because they really do just blow my mind when I'm watching these videos. I'm just like blown away. And you guys, you can access all of Luke's videos on his website, which we'll tag below. I think that's right? All of them?
Yeah,
Or
yeah. Well,
yeah.
I probably update like one or two, but yeah, for the most part, they're all up there. So
And it's a beautiful website, and we're going to get into that here in a little bit because I have some questions for you.
yeah,
But you mentioned some of the lessons you've learned hunting with these, really accomplished hunters. What are some of the big lessons you've learned?
yeah. Oh man, that's a good question. I'd say like one of the biggest ones I learned. I don't know if you saw it, but it's in the film Hard Times with Brady Miller. He's one of my favorite guys I've ever filmed with and hunted with. But we were in a snowstorm in Colorado, and we had shot this bull right at dark, and then it took us till about midnight to get to him and skin him and do everything, dress him, get the whole 9 yards, hang the meat and everything. And luckily we had like a foot of snow, so everything was gonna be totally fine, chilled out and everything. But just how it happened and where we were about 7 miles from camp, and we
Oh my
basically
gosh.
we knew that there was a storm coming, and we were checking our Garmin's and getting like that weather information updates like for our exact location. And we're like, yeah, it's like saying like about a foot it's gonna come like right at 6 a.m. So we're like, well, we have about 6 hours. Like if we run like and at this point like we're pretty low on food, pretty low on water. And so when you mix that with being at high altitude, you can kind of just sometimes, and obviously wanting sleep like really bad, like you're gonna maybe
Exhausted.
you're gonna maybe make not the best decision. Not that I'm not saying we did, but we kind of maybe did make not the best decision on this experience. But we decided to like leave our packs about halfway between the bull and camp, so about 3 miles, 3.5 miles from camp, and we decided just to try and run to camp and outrun the storm, and then drive because we were basically walking this old dirt road. So our thought was we can just run to camp, get my vehicle, and then drive this road and get our backpacks and at least have half the elk out, more or less.
So you were packing the elk with your packs.
Yeah.
You didn't leave the elk on at the kill site and then hike out. You had the elk with you.
Yeah, we just had two front quarters. So we had
Okay, so
basically like
half the elk with you.
yeah, we had like half or a third of the elk basically. We had the two rear quarters and then like all the tenderloin, backstrap, neck meat, and then the head. We left that back at the kill site, just kind of stashed in the trees. But yeah, basically we started like just kind of like jogging down the road, and we were just in our base layers because we were just sweating. So like in our packs we had all my cameras, his rifle, his spotter, all of our gear, all of our puffy jackets, so all of our insulation layers that keep you warm and dry, all of our rain gear were back there. So we were joking about it. We're like, yeah, we probably had, between all that, probably like $30,000-$40,000, in our backpacks,
Yeah.
just like, and we just put rain flies over our backpacks. So it's just getting like dumped with snow. So we ran, and then the snow actually came earlier than what our Garmin's were saying. It came a little bit earlier. And so it started snowing like at 3 a.m. And by the time we got to my vehicle and then tried to drive, the snow had already drifted over so much we couldn't get through. And so we actually got stuck. And then luckily a random hunter was driving out at 4 a.m. and towed us out with a tow strap. But we ended up just going back to camp, sleeping. And I mean, I just happened to have some extra clothes in my truck. So we, had some clothes to wear besides just like our t-shirts, and then we ended up, a guy actually around 8 a.m, because we slept for a few hours, a guy actually got stuck right in front of our tent in the snow. And I have a winch on my FJ. So we are actually able to winch him out. And then he had like a big lifted Tacoma. And so we actually were able to get his Tacoma to get Brady's other truck out from over in the snow on the other side of the unit where we had hiked in from. So basically it was just a complete fiasco.
A fiasco, but the stars were also aligning.
Yeah, we got very lucky when it could have been really
luck.
bad. Yeah. But yeah, basically we were able to get Brady's truck, and then we were able to just kind of like, fuel up, kind of rest that day, because we knew the next day, because we had so much snow on the ground, like, and the temperatures were like in the teens. So
what are you going to do?
The meat was fine. So we're like, well, we have nothing but time, but all we can do tomorrow is hike in there and get the meat. And so I want to say we did like,
did you already get
21
your
miles.
packs by that point in time?
No, we still don't have our packs. So I was like filming all this on my iPhone because that's the only camera I had. I just put it in cinematic mode and called it good. But But yeah, so we had like the next day we did 21 miles from 9 in the morning until 2 a.m. packing to get our backpacks in, and then we got our backpacks, hiked them out. There was like a foot of snow on our backpacks, and we had to like push it all off and
So did
everything.
you like drop a GPS point or something on your
Yeah,
backpack?
we just dropped a pin right on it, so we knew where it was. But yeah, we got our backpacks, hiked back in, so that was like 6 miles, and then we had to hike 7 in, 7 out.
Oh my
You know,
gosh,
for
with
to
the
get the
elk, with
rest.
the other
Yeah,
half of the elk.
yeah,
Oh my
yeah. It
goodness.
was one of the craziest like hunting days I've ever had. But the biggest thing we learned was just like, you know what, like we should have just toughed it out, even if we were walking in the snow and whatever. That leaving our backpacks cost us like 6 or 7 miles of walking.
Oh
And we
yeah,
didn't
it
have our
did.
stuff. We didn't have our insulation layers. We didn't have our, our jet boils to cook. Like we just, that was the
Oh my
biggest thing of like,
gosh.
really you should never leave your backpack on the mountain was like kind of the biggest thing we learned. Unless it's like a very specific scenario and you're not going that far from it. Like
Yeah.
maybe to do like a quick little stalk or something. But yeah, never leave it on the mountain.
In your defense, like you touched on, like you had that was already such a big day, probably
Yeah,
very strenuous, and it probably wasn't the first day on the mountain. Y'all were probably already
correct.
really worn out and mentally, like it's just it drains you
Yeah.
physically and mentally. And
Yeah, I definitely didn't have enough
man, that's
food. And I
wild.
think I think that like kind of led to like your body will just kind of go into like a, fight or flight. Like, I just want to get home and sleep. It's 3 in the morning, it's snowing and miserable. Like, we can deal with this later. Whereas it would have been better just to kind of tough it out, and just have like a better decision making, from not being so
Ah, that's
dehydrated
insane.
and
Yeah,
exhausted and starving. And so
for
just having a
sure.
little bit more snacks. I always try and pack more snacks now too.
More snacks.
Yeah.
The
So
solution, Luke, would have been
yeah,
more snacks.
exactly.
Um,
Potentially. I mean, yeah, I kind of chalk it up to that. So
no, but so looking back now that you have full cognizant ability and are well rested and fed, you would have kept the packs and kept going despite the fact that there was a storm, a heavy storm coming your way,
yeah.
and risk getting caught in the storm.
Yeah, because I mean, it's not like the Garmin dark sky fall or whatever. Like that storm came early. That's just how it is in the mountains. Like things come
Yeah,
early, things come late, things don't come at all. Things
it's
come
like
out of
the
nowhere.
ocean for
Yeah,
sure.
we have the best technology we have available, but it's still, it's nature. Like things can change in an instant, and unfortunately, it changed for the worse. And we thought we could outrun a snowstorm, which we obviously could not. So yeah,
That's cool. That's a great story.
yeah.
Um, what has been your favorite hunting experience on like working as a cameraman? Like what has been your favorite like episode or experience or location or hunt? Take
Oh
your pick.
man, I I don't really know if I could pick one, honestly. I've had just so many incredible ones. Like in terms of like maybe like a pure hunt, like just what happened on the hunt, like never happening again type of a thing. I would probably say like Rivers Bend, like seeing those elk in the river and
Oh, that's
John
so
getting that
cool.
shot at that beautiful bull. Like that, I don't think that'll ever happen again in my lifetime. Like that was just such a unique thing. Yeah, it's such a like I'll never forget it. And it was almost just like watching like National Geographic or just like this most unbelievable picturesque moment that like just doesn't even seem real. Just watching it and it happens. Just,
Yeah.
for me, that hunt is kind of like what that is. But then I've had a lot of hunts where like maybe it really wasn't about like what happened on the hunt necessarily, but just like the story that is just so much more than the hunt. And I've had
Yes.
several hunts like that now. A couple with like Leopold's Project Hunt campaign. Like one's actually coming out in a couple of months with a guy named Cody Austin, but just such an incredible guy. He's in his he's a younger 30s guy, but he just got diagnosed with MS, and just his
Mm.
story and who he is, and just having this diagnosis and be like, you know what, I've always wanted to go elk hunting out west, and I'm just going to make it happen. And burned all his points in Wyoming, and decided to go just hunt elk in the wilderness with horses and take his dad with him. And then Leopold found out about it and through their Project Hunt campaign and sent me to go film it. And the hunt was incredible. He got a beautiful 6 point bull, all this stuff. It was in the snow. We were riding horses, like total just dreamscape. But that hunt film that's coming out in a few months, like it's just so much more than just like the hunt. And it's,
Yeah.
Cody, who he is, his story, what he's been through, what he's going through, and like what he's going to continue to go through. And like one of my favorite hunt stories I've ever put together is that hunt that'll be coming out soon, like I said. But yeah, just because there's so much more to hunting than pulling the trigger, and that's like, and it's a cliche in some ways, but at the same time not, because it really is like, it's stories like Cody's that like make me like just love what I do, because I love hunting. I love being the guy like with the weapon or on a hunt of my own, and I try and always like have one or two hunts of my own each year. But I also, in some ways, love more just like the storytelling aspect of telling these stories on these hunts of it, at facing adversity, and whether that's like just pure adversity of the hunt or adversity in life that is you know a cataclysm for things in life as well. But just telling those and having people watch them and be blessed by them. So
Yeah. No, that's so cool. I agree completely on the fact, hunting is so much more than pulling the trigger or releasing the arrow. I would argue that it's actually my least favorite part of the hunt is the actual kill. Um, it's just always difficult. It's always difficult. But it's just such a rewarding experience, and to be able to connect to your meat that in that way is something that I think that is very, like, to go back on the use of your word primal, I think that it's really important for humans to recognize and be able to connect to where their food comes from, and to be put in these such challenging situations to get it and to feed your family. I think that that is it's something that I haven't it's a level of rewarding that I haven't experienced literally anywhere else.
yeah,
So yeah, that's really cool. And I think that in my opinion, you do an incredible job. And obviously in the opinions of many others, I mean, you've done Go Hunt, Leopold, Under Armour, lots of brands you've worked with. I think that you have a really, really good grasp on telling the story and capturing the story and the unique imagery of the story. Your wildlife photos that you have on your website are absolutely stunning. I do have a question for you. How does one get a picture of a mountain lion quite like that?
thank you so much, Katie. I really appreciate that. But yeah, that mountain lion photo that was actually on a hunt as well. We were in Utah, and I was with Nick Munt from Bone Collector. He had a cougar tag, and I forget the exact story of what happened, but basically it was like Super Bowl Sunday in 2020, and I get a text from him basically saying like, "Hey, my camera guy can't get into Utah until tomorrow. Could you just come out and film with me for a day?" Kind of a thing. And I was just like, "Yeah, it's a Sunday. Like, sure. I'm not doing anything else." So I drove out there that Sunday morning, met up with him at like 6 in the morning, and basically it was just we were at R&K Ranch there in Utah, and they had like a massive cougar problem at their ranch actually, and so we were trying to get this one particular tom that was in the area who had killed a couple deer, a couple cows, and it was like in the wintertime, so it's like early February, so like there's snow on the ground, and we were just trying to get like this one tom. So we go out in this canyon, and we set the dogs out because we had some hounds with us to kind of help them track them and everything like that. And so the hounds take off, we find some fresh tracks, and then we kind of buzz up the canyon, and all of a sudden on our Garmin it shows that the hounds have treed a cougar. And so we're like, dude, this is actually going to happen. And at this point,
How does it show up on your Garmin?
so
How do
yeah,
you know?
Garmin has like this. I mean, their technology is insane. I don't even know how they do it all, but they have these dog collars that can measure, like, I want to say it's like the barking, and
Mhm.
basically like if and obviously the GPS location of that particular dog collar on that dog. So if the dogs are basically not moving and just barking a lot, it'll just indicate that they've treed, which means that like they've
Yeah.
something is in a tree and not moving, and they've kind of pinned it, so their GPS location is not moving. So we kind of know that, like, oh, they most likely have treed, or at least found something of interest or something like that. So when we pull over on the side by side and we get out, at this point I'd been on probably 4 or 5 cougar hunts and bear hunts with hounds, and they're some of the hardest hunts like physically that I've ever been on. Like there's been days where we've released the hounds, and all of a sudden it's like 12 miles later this cougar is still running and we're still chasing it. And it's not like it's not like a cheat code. Just like, oh, like we have dogs and this is going to be like a cakewalk. It's like, no, this is like, buckle up. This is like going to be one of the harder hunts you may ever go on. And I
Oh
have
my gosh.
such a massive respect for houndsmen and hounds hunters. But yeah, basically we got out side by side and we were getting his bow ready because he was going to do it with a bow. And all of a sudden we see a cougar like 50 yards away, like just crouched, like walking in the snow. And we're like, wait, what is going on? And then all of a
Oh
sudden,
my
like
gosh, that's so close.
we realize there's another cougar in this basin because they have like this big cougar problem there. And so we actually stalked on that cougar because he didn't see us. And unfortunately, we lost him in the rocks and couldn't find him. So we ended up just going back down to where the hounds had treed the other one. And sure enough, we get down there and there's this giant cougar in this tree, and it's just like a juniper tree, so it's maybe 20 feet tall tops, pretty short tree. And the dogs are just down there like barking at it, and it's like a huge cougar. And
Oh my
so
goodness.
Nick's getting his arrow ready, and I was just like, hey, can I like go under there with the dogs and get a couple photos? And he's just like, yeah, be my guest. And so I like crawled under there and just like
You're crazy.
I looked up at the cougar and I just like was taking some pictures, and then he like snarled at me. And that's how I got that picture.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, that is wild.
Yeah. And then then I went back to Nick after I got a couple pictures, and then filmed the whole thing happen. He made an absolutely perfect shot. And it's to this day, it's the fastest animal I've ever seen die. Like it literally died in 5 seconds. And I'm not
Wow.
exaggerating. Like he just made a perfect heart shot with the bow. The arrow went like all the way through it and kept going. And there was just like blood everywhere, and it literally died like that.
Oh
And
my
we got
gosh.
up to it, and we actually found out it was a female. And we
I'm gonna
took
have
it
to
to the,
tell my mom not to listen to this episode.
yeah, we took it to the local meat processor and taxidermist there,
Yeah.
and he said it was the biggest female in like 20 years that had come across that he had seen. It was like a
Did he
146-pound female.
That is so big. Did he have an idea of how old she was? Like, did
Oh,
he do the
super old.
teeth?
Yeah, I don't know if we got it aged, but the meat was fantastic. He actually brought a bunch of the meat back home, and it was awesome. Like, and it's very similar to like pork. But I had like
Interesting.
just like a bunch of hamburger and sausage made out of it, and it was
Yum.
unbelievable, just awesome. But
Yeah.
yeah, the whole like she was just like looked like an NFL football player when we skinned her out, like just pure muscle, like just
Holy
like
cow.
absolutely ripped. Like you'd see all the abdominal muscles, like just huge muscles like up in the skull for like where they're for the jaws and locking down and everything
Yeah.
like that.
Oh my
It's
gosh. Those animals terrify me. I
yeah.
I read a book, I think it's called The Beast in the Garden. There's also a like historical fiction book about Nazi Germany that has a similar title. So it might not be The Beast in the Garden, but something like that. Garden of Beasts. I think it's Beast in the Garden. Anyway, it's about mountain lions in Colorado and the problem that they were facing in managing the resource because people didn't want to kill them.
Hmm.
But they were getting like more and more brazen with properties, whether it
Yep.
be, like people would feed the wild deer or, whatever's out there. And then the mountain lions were getting close to the communities. They were starting to eat dogs,
Oh yeah.
cows, the local wildlife. And then
There's been a couple
they
people
started
killed in Oregon and Washington last few years.
Man, so like this story, man, they like started it's so I studied natural resource management and it's like one of these like that it gets real nerdy with like that storyline in terms of like game conservation and management, and you'll probably really like it. But essentially, like they started stalking kids, then they were stalking adults, and it ended like they finally recognized there was a problem when a high school 17-year-old boy, like athlete, high school boy, outside the high school, middle of the day, gets eaten by one. And it's like,
Yeah.
we have a problem here. Like these are apex predators. We are sharing land with them. We have to decide if we're going to be the predator or the prey in a certain point in a certain situation. And it's all about, like respecting the wildlife. We want to have proper game management. We don't want these animals to go extinct by any means. We recognize that they're an important part of the ecosystem. And I want to touch on this with you because when you're telling me this story, like I have to say, like there is a part of me that has a hard time listening to that. It not I love the story, don't get me wrong,
Hmm.
but like listening to the concept of treeing an animal with dogs so it's stranded and then you get the shot out of it already, like it makes me it just makes me uncomfortable. But I recognize, and I have an education to recognize the importance of these types of situations, and that this needs to be done in certain types of situations. Like you were saying, there was a huge cougar problem that she was really like she was a big girl with age. She was already obviously been in charge of a lot of the destruction that had probably been happening to property
Yeah, yeah. She
at
didn't have
that
any
time.
she didn't have any cubs or kits with her, so she was probably past like breeding age. Her teeth were pretty worn down.
That's
So she was
crazy.
definitely like, towards the end of her life, which like with any animal, you're trying to get like, the most mature animal that, not just with the biggest horns, like some people have the misconception, but like just that most mature animal that's had the best chance of spreading his genetics or, or her genetics in that regard. But yeah, I mean, like we're called to be like stewards of all the animals and everything, on this, in this world. Like that's like our job as humans. Cause we are the epitome, creature.
Yeah.
So, and it's
Whether we
hard.
want to believe it or not,
Yeah,
you know?
it's just how it is.
Yeah.
But with like cougars and bears in particular, with like treating them, like they're such an incredible animal, and they're very adept, and there's a reason you go out there and a lot of times you don't see them is just because they're nocturnal. They're incredibly good at surviving, and then you mix that with people not wanting to hunt them as much, or even states passing laws like, oh, you can't use dogs, you can't use bait, for predators and things like that. Well, then what happens is a lot of times your predator population will spike and increase dramatically, which will then affect your deer, elk, your ungulate species, that they're predominantly eating. So then their populations will drop. Well, then what happens is they need to still eat food, and then a cougar's like home range, I've heard, is about 50 miles, and that's like kind of like their zone. And then another cougar will have to have another zone that's like 50 miles. So like you get
Hmm.
more and more zones of cougars, and that are very territorial and dominant.
Yeah, they don't
Well,
share.
what happens is they start encroaching in on our space, and then but then obviously you have like things like population growth and stuff, and like we build cities and highways that are generally like on elk and deer wintering grounds, and things like that.
Hmm.
Like it's such a multi-layered and faceted issue. It's not like really like one thing is going to fix it, but it is so like predator management is so important, and that's why like I'm a huge fan of like Idaho and their management style of cougar and bear and the seasons they have, and the ways that you can do it, with hounds and bait and things like that, because we do have a problem, of these predators. Like if we're not managing them properly, it's going to hurt our deer and elk herds, and then they're going to have to go closer into town and hunt things closer down, like dogs, or even people. Like like
Yeah.
there's been several
Children,
people, yeah, children. Like there's been
adults.
several hikers in Oregon and bikers in Washington who've been attacked and killed, just in the last few years. There's a guy in Colorado who got attacked. Like it's becoming more and more of a problem because we are just trying to, like, in some ways let Mother Nature run its course. But when you do that, um, but when you do that, but also not do that, when you're like, oh,
Hmm.
like we can still hunt deer and elk, but like we don't really want you hunting bears or cougars, and it's like, well, then our predators are just going to continue to grow and grow, and they need more and more, ungulates and stuff. But then those ungulates are dropping in population, so it's all about balance and finding that balance, through science-based biology, and not just voting by your feelings or how you feel about a certain thing. Because
Exactly.
I mean, yeah, like I personally have never been on a hunt, where I've like treed or a cougar or anything, but I've seen it. Like I said, it's been some of the hardest hunts I've ever been on, and those houndsmen have all been some of the most respectful, like just of the bears. Like they just love seeing their dogs work, and a lot of times they'll tree a bear and be like, oh, I'm only going for like the most mature big bear I can, or a cougar. Like I'm not going to shoot an adolescent or a mom with cubs at all. Like like there's like I don't know of any state that lets you shoot a mama bear with cubs. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
there's so many misconceptions out there now that, like, there's just like these guys drinking beer and just blasting away, having having no respect for the animal, no forethought of what it is they're doing and why they're doing it. It's just
Yeah.
it's
Do you think
unfortunate.
that a part of that has to do with the fact that like we've become a population that just focuses on a photo, or a short video, that sees something and doesn't understand the storyline behind it at all?
Totally.
I've,
Yeah, because I mean that's the thing with social media. Like people, like like a trophy photo, for example. Like it's very like divisive for some people, and some people like, but at the same time, like it's awesome because it's like that symbol of like
it's a
that
big
reward.
moment.
Yeah, it's
It's
like
a
a
big
huge.
moment.
And so if someone's disconnected from hunting or doesn't understand, they're like, well, that doesn't make any sense to me. But it's maybe because they don't know the whole story. So I don't know. For me, I like to see, just like posting that kind of like the whole story, maybe like a couple images, like posting the dogs, posting the adversity, posting all that stuff on that type of a hunt. But it doesn't matter what type of, even on elk hunt stuff, like posting those moments in camp, or just those smiles, like being out there, just all that quality time
Or the
spent.
tears.
Yeah, the tears, like everything, just how, and all the different emotions, because that's what hunting is. Hunting is not just like one emotion, it's
No.
literally all the emotions you can possibly feel.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of times in those trophy photos, um, you're the hunter's smiling because it's like, wow, like I just did this, but there's so much more emotion than happiness
Yeah,
going through that person. And
it's so
it's really
complex.
hard to tell this story. But also, like, I post my trophy. I don't really like the title trophy shot, but whatever, you get it. I mean,
Yeah,
that is what it is. I post that because I'm proud of it, like I want to share this with you because it's something that makes me proud because I've worked so stinking hard for this moment.
yeah,
But no, I think you brought up some really really important points on predator hunting, and it's a difficult world, and we have less and less hunters out there, which means like obviously a lot of the funding for conservation of our public lands and wild places in North America are funded by hunting licenses and hunting supplies and all of that. So it's difficult because there's a pretty significant population of people that feel that we should not be killing animals. Um, but then like we're going to be losing the conservation dollars for these places, and that's just going to go to big industry. So
100%.
it's kind of, we find ourselves in a kind of like a catch 22, and it's all about educating yourself properly on how this is structured, and the principle behind hunting in itself is just, I think, really important. But
Yeah,
back to
nothing
you.
nothing raises
Oh,
more money for conservation and animals in public land than hunting. Like, you
yeah.
know, your money spent at REI or your money spent at any like big box store just is a blip. Because those companies do things like that, and
Hmm.
and support conservation at varying degrees, but nothing like buying guns, buying stuff from Cabela's, supporting hunting companies,
Ammunition.
and obviously buying tags and permits and buying stuff out of state. Because I mean, as you know, like you're a non-resident going to be hunting in Idaho this year, your tag was fairly expensive
Yeah.
compared to a resident. My elk tag's $40. You
Oh,
know,
that's so cool.
yeah.
Yeah,
So like
that's awesome.
so these not like that's why like non-resident hunting is so crucial to like the structure of how we have it now. Of just like because there's states now weighing the balance of like, should we get rid of non-resident hunting, to try and make residents more successful, or whatever you want to call it,
Yeah.
because it's like their resource first, blah blah blah. It's a controversial issue, but at the same time, like non-resident hunting is such a massive benefit for conservation to each state, and just in terms of revenue.
Yeah.
And then some
I mean, I
states
think I
manage that
paid
revenue
like,
better than other ones. I'll say
yeah,
that.
that's true.
But each state has its own different goals and objectives, and things like that. Like you have some states that are more of like a opportunity state, and some states that are more of like trying to get like that more mature quality type, limited entry. Like you're only going to draw maybe that state like once every 10 years kind of a thing. Like that's like how Idaho does it. It's more of like opportunity state, like where there's still zones that you can get that optimal trophy, once in a lifetime type tag. But for the most part, it's largely just based on just getting out there, making memories, filling the freezer. And there's still animals out there that are trophy and just beautiful mature animals. But
Hmm.
I like that model, because for me, like hunting is just like, you just got to get out there and do it. Like don't make excuses, or just be like, oh, I'm just going to put in for like the best tag in the world and I'll hunt it in 20 years. And it's like, well, what about these, like years 1 through 20? Like, why don't you go
What
hunting
about
every
all
year?
the lessons you're
Yeah.
gonna learn
Yeah. And then you can
for
use
that
those,
moment?
for your big 20-year hunt. Like, so
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm just such a fan of just trying to get out and find a hunt, something. There's so many opportunities out there still.
Yes.
There's always an opportunity every year to go out and go
We
hunting.
have, like, Drake and I only recently discovered like public land hunt draws like in the last 3 years, and
Yeah.
immediately we paid we paid a lot of money just going into all the draw and hunts in Texas, right? Like we're like, okay, we're gonna focus Texas and we're gonna do this, and we got drawn for a hunt that's an hour from our hometown, like,
Yeah.
and it's the Aransas National Wildlife Refuge, and it's right on the inside of a bay, right? So it's like brackish water. These deer are they're small. They're whitetail, and you have, of course, wild hog, and it is come to find out, Luke, the reason why we got drawn, and we've gotten drawn every year since then, but is because it's such a miserable hunt. Like the mosquitoes are unlike anything I have
Yeah.
ever seen ever. And it's hot because it's September in Texas, and or maybe it's October, early October. I don't remember. I think it's early October in Texas, and it's like, oh, it's brutality at its
Yeah.
finest. The terrain is brutal just because it's like, brushland and, well, rattlesnakes too, and
Oh
all this
yeah.
stuff.
No,
Turns out I'm
thank you.
allergic to the grass there, but it's like, it's so bad. You don't have to trek a bunch of miles by any means, but that's about the only easy part. But that's just like having access to that just blew my mind. If I like, it's so cool. And
But now
most
you
of
know.
the
But now you know
ma-
that like, oh, that zone isn't really like what I like to hunt. But that's okay. And
yeah,
you'll
well,
try
no,
something
we
else.
no, we hunt it
Yeah.
because every year, like most of the meat that Drake and I live off of over the year comes from the hunt at the Aransas Wildlife Refuge. Like that's where we feed ourselves from, and it's super cheap to be
That's
a part of
awesome.
that, and it's so great. Well, super cheap in the realm of hunting, right?
Yeah.
It's nothing like a non-res going to Idaho for an elk hunt.
Yeah.
And I love thinking that I'm, helping fund the conservation of our resources by being a hunter. But that's the truth. That's the truth of it.
A hundred
Um,
percent.
that's so cool. Well, hey, Luke, I'm not going to take up too much more of your time, but I would love to hear just a couple more things from you. What's your favorite? I asked you what your favorite hunting story to work on was, but like you grew up hunting. You grew up on 100 acres in Oregon, which is that's so cool. And obviously hunted a lot with your family. And what's your most cherished hunting memory?
I would probably say when I shot my first elk, I was 20 years old, and it was in Eastern Oregon, and I was playing college baseball at the time. So like my time, like I kind of said earlier, was just like so so stretched thin. Like I it was playing baseball full time and school full time. Like that was pretty much it. And I just happened to have like this one weekend off, kind of the end of fall ball in November, and was able just to basically drive like 6 hours over to Eastern Oregon. And my grandpa, and all my uncles had been there for like a week and a half. And so I only had 2 days to hunt. And so I knew it was like kind of like I was just going over to basically see them and just kind of hang out and spend some time in the
Yeah.
wall tent with them. I didn't really like plan on getting anything really. And I never got on an elk, like I said. And the first day we went out there, me and my dad hiked out, and it was kind of like some light snow on the ground. And our tags were only good for a spike. So you can only shoot like an elk with just like two little horns. You couldn't have like, big horns or anything like that. And my dad and I kind of split up, and all of a sudden, like, I'm maybe 5 minutes away from my dad. I see this like 5 point bull just kind of like walking through the trees 80 yards, and he had a couple
Oh my
cows.
gosh.
And so I just like kind of practiced like stalking in on him. I wasn't going to shoot him obviously because I didn't have a
Yeah.
tag, but just
But
like
hey,
just
here's
like
an
practicing.
opportunity. Yeah.
Yeah, and I got to within like 50 yards of him. I was on. I had my rifle, and just like practice. Just like get like sneaking in on him. Everything had the wind perfect. But just like that moment was like so cool. I was like, wow, I can't believe it just like happened. And then fast forward to the next day, we went to kind of a different area, and my dad wanted to go to like this huge meadow and just like hike in the dark and then sit down and just wait for light to come. And basically, long story short, we waited till light, and then there was about 80 elk in this meadow. And I shot my first spike elk that morning. And my dad and my grandpa and my uncle were all there just to see it and witness it all. And we all made a big fire, and it started snowing, and we just like skinned up the whole thing together. And it was actually like the last like real hunt like I've been on with my grandpa. He's still alive, and I actually took him out for like just like a little day hunt like last year or 2 years ago. But yeah, it was just such a cool memory I'll never forget. I have a photo with all three generations in this elk, and it's just so special to me.
That's so cool. Do you think that that's why, that might have something to do with the fact that you decided to, after school, kind of just get back into the wild?
Yeah, it was actually the same. So that year was like when I got a GoPro. So that was like I had that GoPro on, that hunt with me, and I got a couple pictures like with it and with the elk and my grandpa and my dad. And it was definitely kind of like almost like the very beginning of like taking pictures on a hunt, and just seeing like, oh, this is like my interest with photography was like definitely in its infancy. But then kind of like reconnecting back to like hunting, because I kind of had put hunting on the back burner since like my freshman year of high school, because baseball had just become so important to my life and everything like that. So it was kind of like almost like things were kind of like in a way like switching a little bit.
Man,
But
the
yeah,
first story of all the stories. I
yeah,
love it. That's so cool, Luke. Do you want to tell our listeners where they can find you? I'm going to put your links in the description below, but for anyone that's listening as they drive or run or whatever they're doing.
yeah. I'd say like my Instagram is like a pretty good way to like see most of my stuff. I try and share when it comes out and stuff like that. And it's just my name, Luke Dusenbury. Just like at, the at symbol or whatever. And then, yeah, my website's just lukedusenburyphotography.com. But yeah, and I try and keep it like as updated as I can. I probably need to throw a few things up there, with like the hunt films and stuff like that. But I try and update like once a year. So
Well, you have some beautiful wildlife photography available for sale on your site. I highly recommend you guys. I highly recommend that you check it out because, I mean, there's some stunning shots out there. I also saw you have some presets, which I'm a little bit interested in. So
yeah,
we'll chat about that.
definitely.
But
Yeah,
Luke, thank you so much for taking the time to sit with me today. I really appreciate you joining us.
absolutely, Katie. Thank you so much for having me.
And that's a wrap. If you enjoyed this episode, please feel free to like, share, and subscribe. If you're interested in following along with the elk hunt, stay posted for more content on my Instagram and YouTube channels. As always, don't stop chasing your wild, and we'll be seeing you out there.